Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading Chapter 10, so let's get into it. Quentin had never heard of anybody going to Brakebill South in the gap between fall and spring semesters, which this was. And he wasn't even 100% positive they could get in. They might find the building shut down, Mayakovsky gone or in hiding, the whole place sealed off. If that happened, they'd have to reassess pretty fast and make a break for one of the non-magical research stations on the coast, where their arrival would be hard to explain at best. They spiraled in from above, balancing on their aching wings, steeling themselves for the moment when their webbed seabird feet would skip off the surface of some hard, invisible dome. But the moment never came. Apparently, Mayakovsky considered 500 miles of Antarctic no man's land enough of a defense against home invasion. They alighted on the flat roof of one of the towers and became human again. Quentin figured it was better to let Mayakovsky find them rather than the other way around. He didn't want to startle the old magician into some lethal display of defensive magic, so they made as much noise as possible coming down the stairs. First stop was the laundry, where they secured some Brakebill South robes. The nakedness issue was starting to feel urgent again. The place felt off limits, out of bounds. It was like they were hunting a minotaur in its maze. Quentin trailed one hand idly along a wall, and the smooth stone was cool and sticky, with condensed moisture, something about the heating spells. It gave off a damp basement smell that brought back memories of the last time he'd been here, when they were all studying 18 hours a day under Mayakovsky's rule of silence. There was something he didn't have to worry about at Brakebill South. Nostalgia. He was too hungry to feel anything anyway. They wound up in the kitchen, where they stuffed themselves on anything they could find that might possibly get the taste of bird beak out of their mouths. Quentin was keenly aware that Mayakovsky had no real reason to help them, even assuming he could. He'd always known he wouldn't have much to offer by way of compensation, aside from an intellectually interesting problem and some shameless flattery and, he supposed, the strictly platonic presence of a smart and pretty young woman. But somehow, it had all been more convincing when they were first setting out. They never heard Mayakovsky coming. He just appeared in the doorway, silent as a ghost, looking grim and hungover and unbathed. His stubble was slightly frostier, his gut more prominent, his nails yellower, but otherwise he was perfectly preserved. It was like Antarctica had freeze-dried him. He didn't kill them. "Saw you coming," he growled, miles away. He had on a dressing gown, unbelted, a white button-down shirt badly in need of bleach, and a pair of very short, very unprofessional shorts. "Professor Mayakovsky," Quentin stood up brightly. "I apologize for intruding on your privacy like this, but we're working on an interesting problem, and we could use your help with it." Mayakovsky sawed the end off of a stale loaf of bread with an unwashed knife, spread about an inch of soft, unrefrigerated butter on it, and began to eat standing up. It was pretty clear he wasn't going to throw the ball back. So Quentin kept going. He explained about incorporate bonds and what they were trying to do, and why he, Mayakovsky, alone among all practitioners of the arts invisible, could give them the assistance they so desperately needed. Mayakovsky chewed steadily and noisily, gazing into the distance with watery, rapidly blinking eyes. When Quentin was done, Mayakovsky swallowed, sighed, his round shoulders rising, then falling under his robe, and left the room. He came back with a piece of paper and a blunt pencil. He swept some crumbs onto the floor and put them down in front of Quentin. "Write it down," he said. He pointed at Plum. "You, make coffee." Plum made a monster face at him behind his back. Quentin turned up his palms. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? She made a monster face at him, too. Fine, he said. You draw. I'll make the coffee. While Plum produced a crude approximation of their original flowchart, Quentin made coffee in a battered Soviet-era espresso maker. Mayakovsky came back for both the drawing and the coffee. He didn't bother to pour, he just took the whole machine, and left again. It was just as well. Quentin was getting tired. He hadn't slept for 4 days. There had been no breaks during the flight from the coast, and whales didn't really sleep at all. He found his way to the dormitory wing by memory, and lay down on a cot in one of the empty cells and fell asleep in the milky white Antarctic light. He had no idea how long he'd slept, but when he came back down to the dining hall, matters had progressed. Mayakovsky was back, now wearing glasses with heavy black frames, sitting at a table talking heatedly at Plum and waving his arms. The flowchart was on the table in front of them. It looked like it had been repeatedly folded into 2-inch squares and then unfolded again. Most of the white space was now full of annotations and calculations in Mayakovsky's tiny blocky handwriting, a jumble of numbers and letters, Roman and Cyrillic, and more obscure symbols. Quentin pulled up a chair. Mayakovsky's body odor was sharp as cheese. It is crazy what you are doing. Mayakovsky shook his head with Slavic melancholy, as if their sheer incompetence saddened him. A valid exploit, yes. All right. Crude. This here. Totally unnecessary. Totally. He tapped the paper heavily. And this you transpose. It is working against your secondary effects here and here. Spell is fighting itself. You understand? But the rest is not so terrible. It was better than Quentin expected, listening to him crisply pause their tangled, fudged work. He knew they'd been right to come to him, however much it had cost them and might still cost them. These, though, no. It was a round, resonant, definitive Russian no. He indicated one of the later stages of the spell with the back of his hand, like he didn't even want to touch it. It was that far beneath his contempt. It is impossible. Waste of time. You need more power. More, much more. It is a simple matter of scale. You are, you are trying to dig through a mountain using a toothpick. Professor Mayakovsky shook his head again. His mood was darkening visibly, heading for black. You are needing more power, much more. See? Kaziri and Kaziri. He indicated 2 points on their flowchart, like a lot of Russians. Mayakovsky had mastered many arcane points of higher mathematics, but not the English letter H. Between here and here. I said that, Plum said. Remember? That's basically exactly what I said. I remember. Quentin stared at the chart. His confidence was flagging. It all seemed very inadequate now. How much more power? Much. Orders of magnitude. Magnitude. You want to break the bond with these? He grabbed Quentin's fingers in one paw-like hand and shook them in front of Quentin's face. These little things? Waste of time. Would take 100 years, or 100 Quentins. Or 100 plums, Plum said. 50 plums, Mayakovsky said gallantly, with a quick yellow grin. But you are nowhere near it. Nowhere near. Waste of time. He crumpled up the diagram and threw it at the wall. Quentin watched it roll to a stop under a table. He would have liked to take a few minutes to go back through the spell in a patient, civil, collegial fashion, looking for areas of flexibility, places where the multipliers could be tweaked, maybe, to make up the difference. But Mayakovsky rolled over him, Frog marching him briskly through the math of it, brutally multiplying 3 and 4 digits in his head as he went. It was all Quentin could do to keep up. There was nothing that Mayakovsky didn't know about incorporate bonds, apparently. It was like he'd studied up on them specifically in anticipation of their arrival. He understood their spell far better than they did. Quentin wondered what Mayakovsky's own work looked like, if he had any. He was alone out here half the year every year. What the hell did he do with himself? With a mind like his, there was no limit to what he might have accomplished, if he wanted to. But Quentin had no idea what Mayakovsky wanted. Quentin closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He could picture the whole spell in his head, and he could follow what Mayakovsky was saying, but he couldn't see an answer. There had to be a way through. He was damned if he was going to go back empty-handed. Maybe I could store it up, he said. Build up the power over time, construct a kind of containment device. I could cast the spell 100 times, store it up, release it all at once. And you stabilize how? Store how? What is storage matrix? I don't know, a gem, a coin, something like that? Mayakovsky made a rude noise. Bad magic. Dangerous magic. Or, Quentin said, I could get 100 magicians together. We'll cast it all at once. I think you will not be telling 100 magicians about this little project. Fair point. Probably not. It would be very risky. True. I do not know why you want to break an incorporate bond, but whatever it is not legal, I don't think. Even me, you should not have told. Mayakovsky was studying him across the table. Quentin studied him back. His stolid face was impossible to read. Plum watched the exchange alertly. If he's bluffing, call it. If he's not, what the hell are you going to do about it? Maybe you should turn us in, Quentin said. I mean, if it comes out that we were here, you could lose your job. Maybe I should. Mayakovsky stood up and went to a cabinet and rummaged through it. He took out a bottle of something clear without a label. I want you out of my house, he said. I will make a portal. But then, instead of throwing them out, Mayakovsky lapsed into a funk. He sat back down at a table in the corner and started drinking. After a few minutes, he offered the bottle to Plum. Drink? Plum sniffed, took a sip, coughed, wiped her mouth, and handed Quentin the bottle. Drink? She said. It smelled like radiator fluid. Christ, he said. What is this? That got a rare laugh from Mayakovsky. Antarctic moonshine. It wasn't a very reassuring answer. What could possibly grow here that you could even ferment? Lichens? He hoped it was lichens. The alternative seemed even worse. Mayakovsky lapsed back into silence. He seemed to feel no need to even acknowledge their presence anymore, though Quentin noticed he didn't leave them alone either. He and Plum exchanged flummoxed looks. Mayakovsky didn't seem to want to talk about incorporate bonds. They tried to engage him in small talk about life at Brakebill South, but he was impervious to banter. Are you related to the poet? Plum asked him. Nint. Mayakovsky added something snarly in Russian, probably about poets. So Quentin and Plum compared notes about their experiences as blue whales, gossiping about the various pods they could remember, while Mayakovsky stared at the wall and drank steadily and mechanically. He brought out a loaf of dark bread and some pickles, but he didn't eat. Just picked the loaf up every few minutes and sniffed it and put it back down. How long was he going to let this go on? Well, Quentin wasn't going to help him. He was going to drag this out as long as he had to the bitter end. He wasn't going to give up, not until Mayakovsky made him. The Antarctic light outside was like an interrogator's lamp, steady and without mercy. It felt like they were the last 3 human beings on Earth. As much as he openly despised them, Mayakovsky couldn't seem to bring himself to banish them either. Maybe he was lonelier than he let on. Eventually he got out a chess set, with one pawn replaced by a knob from a cabinet. First, he destroyed Quentin. Then he beat Plum twice, the first time with some difficulty, the second time after 3/4 of an hour and by the narrowest of margins. Quentin suspected Plum of pulling her punches. Maybe Mayakovsky suspected too. Midway through their third game, he stood up abruptly. "Come." He set off out of the room with his rolling, purposeful gait. "Bring bottle." Quentin looked at Plum. "After you," she said. "Ladies first. Age before beauty. P's before Q's." It was starting to seem funny. They were a pair of comedy supernumeraries. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to Mayakovsky's gloomy Hamlet. Glean what afflicts him. And Quentin found some glasses. He was tired of sharing a bottle with Mayakovsky, though no doubt Antarctic moonshine had powerful sterilizing properties, and they followed him. He led them through a door Quentin had never seen unlocked before, and through his private apartment. Quentin averted his eyes from the many small, unclean garments scattered on the floor. "Drink!" Mayakovsky roared as they walked. "Thanks," Quentin said, "but I'm—" "Drink! This is your professor speaking." "You know," he said, "I'm a professor now, too, technically speaking, or I was. I will show you something, Professor Skradling. Something you will see nowhere else." Apparently, murderous drinking was the price of admission to Mayakovsky's inner sanctum, but Quentin was willing to follow any lead, no matter how tenuous. He was still wobbly from the trip over, but the moonshine had ignited some smoldering heat source in his stomach, a sour, slow-burning peat fire. Mayakovsky himself didn't seem particularly drunk, except that his mood had flipped from depressive to manic. He led them down 2 flights of stairs, down into the Antarctic rock itself. Maybe he was the anti-Santa of the South Pole, and he was going to show them where the elves made lumps of coal for anti-Christmas. Quentin prayed to every god he could think of, living and dead, that this was not a sex thing. It wasn't. It was Mayakovsky's laboratory, a suite of dark, square, windowless workrooms, each one furnished with well-worn benches and tables and studded with silent, heavy machinery. A drill press, a bandsaw, a small forge, a lathe. In contrast with everything else in Mayakovsky's domain, it was all magnificently clean and orderly. The tools and instruments were polished and laid out in straight rows on cloths, as if they were for sale. The machinery gleamed a dull matte blue-black. The room was still, except for some quiet, regular motion in the shadows. A softly swinging pendulum, a spinning top that for some reason didn't stop, a slowly turning armillary sphere. The 3 of them stood looking around in the half-light, the lichen vodka or whatever it was momentarily, forgotten. The silence was another level below the regular ambient silence of Antarctica, an absolute sonic vacuum. "This is lovely," Plum said. It was true. Beautiful. "I know why you do this," Mayakovsky said. He didn't so much answer them as continue a monologue that had been going on in his head. You, he looked at Plum. "You, I don't know. Maybe you were bored. Maybe you are in love with him? Plum waved that one off frantically, a full arm gesture. No, abort, abort. But you, Quentin, you, I understand. You are like me. You have ambition. You have to be great wizard. Gandalf, maybe. Merlin. Dumbledore? He spoke softly and, for him, gently. He drank, then cleared his throat and spat wetly into a handkerchief, which he stuffed into the pocket of his robe. He'd been living alone for a long time. Did he, Quentin thought, want to be a great magician? Was that the truth? Maybe it used to be. Now all he wanted was to be a magician, period. He wanted to break an incorporate bond. He wanted Alice back. But truth was, seeming pretty relative at this point. Truth was a substance soluble in lichen vodka. Sure, he said. Why not? But you will not be great. You are clever, yes. You have good head. He reached over and rapped on Quentin's head with his knuckles. Don't do that. But Mayakovsky was unstoppable, a drunk best man, hell-bent on giving an important toast. Fine head, better than most. But sadly for you, there are many heads like it. 100, 1,000 maybe. I'm sure you're right. No point in denying it. He leaned against the cool, oiled metal of a drill press. It felt reassuringly stable, an ally at his back. 500, Plum said generously. She boosted herself up on a table. Be fair. You will never be great. You know nothing of greatness. You want to see? I will show you greatness. He waved his arm expansively at the darkened workbenches, and all through the room, metal and glass stirred and glowed and came alive. Engines moved, wheels turned, flames lit. This is my museum. Museum of Mayakovsky. And he showed them what he'd built in the long Antarctic winters. Mayakovsky's workshop wasn't just a marvel. It was a library of marvels. It was a catalog of answered prayers and impossible dreams and holy grails. Suddenly, Mayakovsky was a showman, ushering them grandly from table to table. Here was a perpetual motion machine and a pair of 7,000 league boots. He showed them one drop of universal solvent, which no vessel could contain and thus had to be kept magically suspended in midair. He showed them magic beans and a pen that would write only the truth, and a mouse that aged backwards, and a goose that laid eggs in gold, silver, platinum, and iridium. He spun straw into gold and turned the gold into lead. It was the end of every fairy tale. All the prizes for which knights and princes had fought and died, and clever princesses had guessed riddles and kissed frogs. Mayakovsky was right. This was grand magic. This was what a lifetime of solitary practice and toil bought you. Later, it was hard for Quentin to remember details. The moonshine bleached them out of his brain cells like an industrial detergent. But he recalled a piano that would improvise according to your mood, never repeating itself, optimizing the music according to how you responded, becoming more and more beautiful until it was the sound of everything you'd ever wanted to hear. After a few minutes, it was painful. He had to tell Mayakovsky to stop it before he broke down sobbing. Later, he couldn't have hummed the melody to save his life. This, Quentin, this is greatness. These are things you will never do, never understand. It was true. Even with the strength he'd gained after his father died, he would never be in Mayakovsky's league. It cost him nothing to admit it. He just wished that with all his genius, Mayakovsky could help them. But Plum was frowning. But I mean, so why are you still here? She said. In Antarctica. If you're this great wizard, I don't get it. I mean, look at all this stuff. You could be famous. I could be. Mayakovsky said it sourly. The showman was gone. But why? Why should I care if people know my name? People do not deserve Mayakovsky. So you like being here? Alone like this? I don't understand. Why shouldn't I like it? He stuck out his lower lip. He didn't much care for being psychoanalyzed. Here, I have everything. Outside, there is nothing for me. Here, I can do my work. But she's right. It makes no sense. Quentin found his voice. You've probably solved problems people have been banging their heads against for years. You have to go back and tell everybody. I have to do nothing. And then more quietly, enough. I will never go back. I am done with that. Even with his ordinary, averagely brilliant brain, Quentin was beginning to understand. He knew a few things about Mayakovsky's personal history, how he'd had an affair with a student named Emily Greenstreet that ended so disastrously that he'd had to flee to Brakebill South. And Quentin knew something about hiding out from the world, too. He'd done his fair share of it. He'd been so depressed and traumatized after what happened to Alice that he withdrew from the world of magic and swore never to cast a spell again. If he never risked anything more, he reasoned, he could never lose anything more. He could never hurt anybody else. But it hadn't lasted. It wouldn't do. Never risking anything meant never having or doing or being anything either. Life is risk, it turned out. Elliot and Janet and Julia had come for him, and he'd gone back to Fillory after all. He'd risked again and won and lost, and it hurt, but he didn't regret it. Not any of it. You're wrong, Quentin said. Fine, you're a genius, but you're wrong about this. You could go back. It wouldn't be as bad as you think. Do not tell me what I can do. Do not tell me who I am. When you can do all this, little man, then you can judge me. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying you are not such a mystery. Mayakovsky jabbed Quentin in the chest with a finger like a dried sausage. You think I do not know you? They threw you out of the place, that other world you go to, yes? And you came back to Brakebills. But but they would not have you there either. So out you go again. Jesus. He must know about Fillory, or at least the Netherlands. Mayakovsky advanced on Quentin, who gave ground. Well, yeah, Quentin said. But you'll notice I'm not hanging around my ice castle brooding about it. No. Now you want to be a criminal. But even that is too much. You have to come running to Daddy, begging for help. My dad's dead. Quentin stopped backing up. I may be a second-rate magician. Or, I may be a second-rate magician, he said, but at least I'm not a weird recluse who yells at people. I'm out in the world trying to get something done, and I'll tell you something else. I think you know how to break an incorporate bond. In fact, oh my God, maybe he actually was a genius. In fact, I think you're under one yourself. That's what's keeping you here, isn't it? Mayakovsky had been very well prepared for their visit. Too well, even for him. It was a long shot, but Mayakovsky hesitated, and Quentin knew he was close. Tell me how to break it. He pressed his advantage. You must have figured it out, even if you're too scared to do it yourself. Tell me how. Help somebody for a change. He'd touched a nerve, because something went cold behind Mayakovsky's eyes, and he slapped Quentin across the face. Quentin had forgotten how he liked to do that. It stung like hell, though not as much as it would have if he hadn't already been drunk on lichen vodka. It made his ears ring, but his face was already 2/3 numb. He was drunk enough that he did something he'd always wanted to do, which was to slap Mayakovsky back. with his grisly hide. It was like slapping a crocodile. Mayakovsky broke out in his sulphurous yellow grin. "There it is!" he shouted. "Again!" Quentin slapped him again. With no warning, Mayakovsky threw his thick arms around Quentin in a big Russian bear hug. It was hard to follow the emotion about face. But Quentin went with it. Why not? Over Mayakovsky's shoulder, he saw Plum watching them round-eyed. She looked like she was trying to teleport herself out of the room through sheer force of will. But fuck it. Why shouldn't two men hug each other in a basement in the middle of Antarctica? He patted Mayakovsky's back with his free hand. This poor fucking guy. And Quentin's father was dead. Who else was he going to hug? This must be what having a family is like, he thought. This must be how people hug their parents. Good old Mayakovsky. They weren't so different after all. "I am a dead man, Quentin. This is my grave. I bury myself here." "That's ridiculous," Quentin said. "It's stupid. You can break the bond. You can come back any time. Come with us." Mayakovsky pulled away. He held Quentin at arm's length. "You keep your shit world. You hear me? You keep it. I will stay here. I am done." He patted Quentin's cheek. "It is over for me. You are a pathetic mediocrity. But you are braver than me. You will not end like Mayakovsky. It is not over for you." He held out the bottle. Christ. Quentin thought they'd finally finished it, but there it was, practically full again. He must be refilling it by magic. Quentin didn't remember much after that. Later, he would have a hazy recollection of Mayakovsky singing and laughing and weeping, but it all got mixed up with the lichen-flavored dreams he had after he passed out, and he could never separate the fact from the hallucinations. In his dreams, at least, they sat on the floor of the workroom, passing the bottle around, and Mayakovsky told them about how he'd been there in the Netherlands, too. When the big blue gods returned and tried to take their magic back, how he'd fought them alongside the dragons, how he'd ridden bareback on the great white dragon of Lake Vostok, how he'd smashed the bell jar over the Netherlands with lightning and thunder from his own hands. The next morning, Quentin woke up in his own bed, not in Brakebill South, in his own bed, back in the Newark Airport Marriott. He had no memory of how he got there. Mayakovsky must have sent them back through a portal after all, the same way he'd sent Quentin back to Brakebill's after the race to the South Pole. Though Jesus, it made him shudder to think of Mayakovsky opening portals in the state they'd been in. Alcohol and portal magic, not a great combination. When Quentin sat up, he immediately wished he had in fact died in a catastrophic teleportation accident. Every hangover feels like the worst hangover you've ever had, but this one was definitely a classic, one for the ages. He felt like all the water had been forcibly sucked out of his body, like an apricot in a dehydration chamber, and replaced with venom from an angry adder. Slowly, carefully, he got to his hands and knees. He pushed his face into his pillow, abasing himself before whatever angry god had done this to him. Maybe there was some untainted blood left somewhere in his body, and it would run downhill into his aching brain. His fingers felt something under his pillow, something hard and round and cool to the touch. A gift from the Tooth Fairy. He took it out. He was right. It was a gift. It was a coin, shiny and gold, the size of a silver dollar, but slightly thicker. There were 3 of them. He turned one over in his hand. It gleamed like it was in sunlight, but the curtains were drawn. He knew what it was right away. Quentin smiled, his dry lips cracking. Mayakovsky had done it. Exactly what Quentin had said. He'd stored up power in these coins, the power he'd need to break the bond. Mayakovsky must have prepared them to break his own bond, but then never used them. God bless the old bastard. Maybe Quentin's father hadn't had any power, but Mayakovsky did, and more than that, he'd had the courage to pass it on to someone else. He was wrong about himself. He was a brave man after all. Kneeling on the bed, his headache already fading, Quentin held one of the coins between two fingers and made it disappear. A one-handed sleight, stage magic, then brought it back. It felt like the present he'd been waiting for all his life. He wouldn't waste it. The plan was going to work. They were going to break the bond and steal the case, and then he could start over. He could start his real work. For the first time since he'd left Brakebills, his life was starting to make sense to him again. The coin's edges were sharp and newly minted. On one side was the image of a wild goose in flight. On the other was a face, a young woman in profile. She was Emily Greenstreet. That's it for this week. We'll see you guys next week with Chapter 11.